Hello, and welcome to ESG Talk, your go-to source for insights and advice from leaders in environment, social, and governance. I'm your host, Mandi McReynolds, Chief Sustainability Officer at Workiva. Today, I'm joined by Katherine Neebe, Senior Vice President of National Engagement and Strategy, and the Chief Sustainability and Philanthropy Officer at Duke Energy, one of the world's largest energy holding companies in the United States. Katherine, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for including me.
All right, so let's set the stage for our listeners. First, it's important to note that Duke Energy is undertaking one of the largest energy transitions in North America and has set a commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. Second, as an energy provider, Duke Energy has a unique position for environment, social, and governance in ESG, in addition to setting its own sustainability targets and serving millions of small businesses and residential consumers. Duke Energy also influences the sustainability goals of its large corporate customers, so really crosses that entire spectrum of how we're going to move forward as a society in the energy transition. Katherine, before we dive into customers, tell us about the progress Duke Energy has made in reducing its own emissions and what your future looks like in terms of renewable energy, nuclear, and natural gas.
Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting things about the energy sector, I came to Duke about 3 years ago, is how interwoven our corporate strategy is with topics affiliated with ESG or sustainability. And as we think about our corporate strategy, and candidly that of most other major utilities in the US, it's about providing reliable, affordable, accessible, and increasingly clean energy. And so it's really nice. I've worked in sustainability for 25 years, and to come to a company where it's really kind of navigating the environmental and social and, of course, financial pressures that so many are facing in this sector. As the U.S. utilities overall, we've already decarbonized 40% relative to a 2000 baseline. So a lot of progress behind us as we look forward, certainly more to go. At Duke, 95% of our scope 1, 2, and 3 calculated emissions are now set towards a net zero goal, looking at a variety of kind of interim goals at 2030, 2040, 2050. We're leading the largest planned retirement of coal in our industry. And to date, we've already decarbonized around 44% relative to that 2005 baseline. And as we're thinking about this kind of next generation of the transition, really thinking about what are the technologies that are here today that will enable us to retire coal, that will allow us to scale renewables, thinking about the importance of the grid to support that diverse generation mix. And then over the long term, really looking at some of those next generation technologies, small modular reactors, long duration storage, hydrogen, all of these technologies that are really going to be able to us to ratchet all the way down to net zero. And of course, I don't have to tell you guys this, but the social impacts of the clean energy transition are also top of mind. So how are we thinking about issues like environmental justice and the just transition, really top of mind given our coal plant exit and the impacts that we need to be navigating to employees, to communities, et cetera. And of course, energy equity. Who has access to some of these next generation technologies? Who has access to renewables? How are we thinking about that way in an equal and an equitable manner?
We value how much you just talked about that these midterm, short-term, and long-term goals also have an S component to it, also has a social component to it. And to be thinking about these notions integrated is such key for our audience to have as a takeaway as they develop their own long-term plans, that we can't just pull a lever on one and not see the impact to the other.
It's such a great point that you're making, not to interrupt, but it's such a great point because as you just acknowledged and can fully appreciate, like our ability to drive progress on environmental outcomes is almost dictated by our ability to bring people along in that journey in the most effective, enabling way. So we've got to be thinking about the social stuff, if not more deeply than we are the environmental stuff, for us to see the kind of macro success and the outcomes that we all want to achieve.
Absolutely. So let's take that and shift gears a little bit to one factor of the S, which is looking at your customer base. So Duke Energy has had huge customer base, as we talked about in the opening, including residential consumers, small businesses, and large corporations, covering that entire spectrum. So, how do you balance the diverse needs of these customers and your stakeholders?
Yeah, we are always really reaching out, not just to our customers, but our other stakeholders, our employees, our investors, the communities where we operate, to constantly get input from them about what they're experiencing with energy, what their needs are, how they're appreciating Duke, opportunities for us to improve. So a constant, steady cadence of communication with those key stakeholders. And of course, we're also mindful that we're in an industry that is in the midst of massive transformation and even a degree of disruption. So, keeping an eye on how the energy sector is evolving in the US, internationally, so that we can understand how that's going to interact with all of our stakeholders and how they're going to think about Duke. And then, of course, some of these external trends that also will shift how people engage with energy, thinking about the economic health of the region, of the country, thinking about severe weather, all sorts of things to really kind of boil together and come together. And what is going to be the Duke Energy value proposition to customers and other stakeholders? And then how are we really delivering against that in a way that adds value, not just to our business, but also to the communities that we serve?
Do you see your relationship with customers as evolving in the context of sustainability and the energy transition? Unpack that a little bit more for us.
Yeah, that's the really cool thing. I mean, there's so much that's really fascinating about this industry right now because it is just moving so quickly. But when you think about our customers, I think, well, first, there are kind of three broad categories of customer. You've got residential, think of like your mom and dad. Then you've got commercial, and then you've got industry. So large kind of energy loads. Their relationship with the energy sector is evolving in a really interesting way with the rise of electrification, thinking about the transformation of cars and trucks and automotive, thinking about how people install smart thermostats, et cetera, in their homes. So people, broadly speaking, are really engaging with energy in new and different ways. And as we come and meet their needs, our relationship with them is also evolving. So going from perhaps a more transaction based customer to really a true partner as we navigate the clean energy transition, I think is really exciting. And if you think about our business and our business model, we've got to be able to generate enough energy at a moment in time to meet the demand. It's very much a real time supply demand challenge or opportunity that is in front of us. And as we're able to engage with our customers on what their energy load looks like, we can really generate to that. And so there's the potential in the fullness of time for individual customers to almost become mini power plants where they're using energy in a different way at a different time that allows us to, as inexpensively as possible, build the energy capacity that is needed to serve them. So it's really cool. And I think having our customers be as sophisticated as possible about the energy transition is just such an opportunity for us.
Let's double click on the large business customers in particular. There's an invested interest in how companies are looking at you to help them with emissions and pursue their clean energy. So, tell us a little bit more about Duke's emissions in scope 3 as you look at particularly the large corporations engaging.
The majority of our emissions, 70% of our calculated emissions, are scope one. Around 30% are scope three. Scope two, really a rounding error for us. This is the energy that is generated that we purchase for our own use. And so I'm here in Washington, D.C. Duke Energy does not serve the Washington, D.C. office. So think about the energy, the greenhouse gas affiliated with this office, for example. So scope one is where we're generating the energy and where we have the vast majority of our footprint. And just if you'll bear with me for 1 second, most major US utilities have commitments and goals roughly in line with Duke Energy's. So if I'm a customer of basically most utilities in the US, I can anticipate that my scope 2 emissions, Duke Energy scope 1 emissions, power purchased for your own use, are going to kind of drive down to net zero in the fullness of time. So that's the good news. When we think about scope 3, for us, when we kind of dove into that, these are the emissions, as of course I'm sure everyone in the audience knows, but I feel like I sometimes need to explain because so few people beyond this audience are really conversant in the greenhouse gas protocol in scope 1, 2, or 3. But as I think about scope 3, it's those emissions upstream and downstream. And so there are really three major contributors to those emissions that we see. First, emissions affiliated with the extraction, production, transportation, et cetera, of fossil fuels, for us, primarily coal. Second, power that we purchase on the energy system to sell to customers. I won't go into the complexity of the national grid, but there is some transaction that happens there. And then third, it's emissions affiliated with customer use for natural gas. And so you can expect as we retire coal and move to net zero that the extraction, production, transportation emissions will wind down. You can expect that other utilities consistent with Duke Energy's ambition will also drive down emissions. And then as we think about customer use for natural gas, here's some work on just decarbonizing the overall system. We've got a net zero methane goal by 2030, but also the role of renewable natural gas and hydrogen and other technologies that are going to enable us to really achieve that goal.
Katherine, I love the explanation of it because you're right. Listeners may come from all different journeys and all different backgrounds. We are a show that's about making the complex simple. So that all sounds very complex as you navigate different systems. And I'm curious, how do you navigate that complexity? And what's a takeaway for our listeners on how they can do that too?
Yeah, I think if nothing else, this field has taught me deep humility and that I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. What I need to be really good at is making sure that I'm listening to all different perspectives without bringing kind of my own bias, my own value to the conversation to really understand. And then I think the second thing is surrounding myself with really smart people, and they're going to come and want to maximize one thing. They're going to want to talk about trade-offs, but really making sure that you're surrounding yourself by people who really are subject matter experts in one thing or the other that are really related, and then kind of getting around a table and saying, what are we really trying to solve for here? I think that's so kind of essential. The other thing that I think is a helpful unlock as you're navigating all of these issues and trying to figure out what is the best path forward for the business, what is the best path forward for its stakeholders, is shifting the conversation, which we so often default into in the world of sustainability and ESG. And that default is so often, what are the trade offs? And I like to think about, well, how do we optimize this system to deliver value over time? And I think that is really helpful framing because it puts everyone in, I think, generally speaking, a much more positive mindset. I think beyond that, just kind of as a problem solving world, I think there's, as a sustainability ESG practitioner, I mean, I think I've had every different version of sustainability, corporate social responsibility, et cetera, in my, in my job title and my scope of work, is really understanding what are the most relevant issues to that particular business. And it's really a question about, I'll use the word materiality, but with like a little m. So, what really matters to the business, what really matters to the stakeholders served, and then how are you solving for those?
So I love that you have done some recent examples of collaborating with your customers to drive clean energy. Would you mind sharing with our audience and educating them on one or two case studies of customer collaboration that could be something they could learn from Duke Energy on?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is so many customers, large customers of ours and residential customers, are thinking through, do they want to electrify their fleet? Do they want a car that they can use for daily commuting or for the occasional road trip? Do they have large product deliveries that they need to be making within a city? And if you think about the energy system, and I'm going to really oversimplify it, for so many years, you had an energy system that had generation, perhaps a coal plant or a hydro plant or nuclear plant, but you had facilities that generated really predictable amounts of energy in a moment in time and then delivered it at kind of a understanding, well, this is a community where we've got a bunch of manufacturing, and so we can anticipate what the load is going to be, so you can really kind of maximize it. And the energy went one direction, from generation to transmission to distribution. We're now in a world where we've got, for example, a large retailer that is looking to electrify their transportation. And so now all of a sudden you have energy that is being pulled off of the system in a place that it never was before, because it's a lot of energy demand that's going to be required to charge up all of those trucks and cars, et cetera, at an hour that it was never being used. You also have an energy system that has all kinds of generation on it at the same time. And it's not always predictable. You've got wind, you've got solar, you've got retiring coal, you've got nuclear. And so you've really got this highly complex generation mix, this grid that needs to navigate all of these different pulls and pushes for energy, and these customers that are trying to figure out, can I do it? Can I electrify my fleet? Are the cars and trucks available? But also, is the system there to really support me so that I can get what I need to get delivered? And what I'm seeing are some really cool partnerships with these large companies to talk about where you can potentially site some of those charging stations. How do you want to really think about what demand can be supported in a really hyper local way? And it's really interesting because this all on paper seems fairly straightforward, and then you get to it and there's some real complexity within the system. And so for us, really partnering with our customers to understand what they need, their timelines, et cetera, is so key.
Let's take another twist for our listeners. Both of us, when we were doing the preparation for the call, talked about having both an ESG sustainability background as well as a philanthropy background. And in your role, those two are combined, your chief sustainability officer and philanthropy officer. So I would love for you to share with our audience, how does philanthropy contribute to your mindset of the shift?
Having worked in sustainability for a long time, I'm most familiar where when you have sustainability and philanthropy kind of come together to do the problem solving. It's certainly true here at Duke. It was true when I was at Walmart, and previously when I was with WWF, the Pandas, not the wrestlers, when I was with the Pandas working with Coca-Cola, that's also how they approached this work. And when I think about, as a sustainability practitioner, the tools that are at my disposal to help drive and accelerate the change that is so essential, I break it down into four. The first is, where can the business really act to drive the change that is important to mitigate the risk? And supplier purchasing agreements, great example, corporate goals, et cetera, great example. So where can the business really move? And then I think about, so often we're trying to address systems challenges. So where can I work? Second tool, where can I work in a multi-stakeholder collaborative way to really help drive the change that is so essential? Third place that businesses so often engage on these issues is on policy, whether or not the right policy is on the books or whether or not that policy is enforced, really important. And the fourth, which I hold for last, is philanthropy. Because so often these challenges that we're facing are also market failures. And so as you align philanthropy with business challenges, you're really able to much more meaningfully address a place where there may be a market failure using philanthropic funds to close the gap.
I really value that four-step process that you just laid out, and really anchoring that endpoint about using philanthropy to close the gap. And it's the issues that, what I appreciate about your strategy and your approach, it's the issues that are most material to your business and where you have the opportunity to solve. Just encourage everyone to go read Duke Energy's impact report and looking at their ESG reporting, because there's some really unique ways that you're approaching that, from a talent side to then how do you have access within homes for energy, to close that gap. So thank you for your work there, and thank you for sharing with our listeners that combination. So we know that technology and innovation will play a key role. You kind of talked a little bit about that as you laid out your model. Tell us a little bit more. Duke is collaborating with Amazon Web Services to deploy new smart grid services and software to meet the energy demand. I think our listeners would love to know, why did you choose them as your partner, and what does this process look like working together?
Well, AWS was just a natural partner for us, given the engagement we already have with them in our service territory, coupled with this kind of hyper customer focus and mindset. I think Amazon has some phrase for it that they love, and I cannot recall right now, but it really is this hyper focus on the customer. So I think culturally, there's some real alignment there that has been really, really powerful. And I've talked about it, we've talked about it, but the grid is really one of the unsung heroes of the energy transition. You can build all of the generation that you could possibly dream of, and you could have people out in the system that need energy at kind of a different hour and have goals for renewable or for clean or for what have you, reliable, affordable. But you need something that can connect those two. And here the grid is so essential. Again, the grid was, I'm overly simplifying, was built kind of one directionally many, many, many years ago. And now we have distributed energy. So it's scattered across the service territory. It's intermittent, which means it comes online at different times, sometimes unpredictable times. And then you have demand that's occurring kind of, it's shifting so rapidly as customers electrify, as you have economic development, as their needs change. And so the grid becomes a really, really sophisticated component of the energy transition and part of our infrastructure that we cannot ignore. And so by partnering with AWS, we're able to use their brain to think about how can we model, how can we do scenario analysis to look at millions and millions of gigabytes of data to try and understand where is that energy going to evolve, where is it going to grow, where is it going to shift, so that we can really make sure that we are, as a company, able to serve those customers with the reliable, affordable energy they need when they need it.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because, as you know, on our show, we talk about innovation, we talk about technology. For our listeners, an earlier episode was our 2023 ESG Global Practitioner Survey, where practitioners like you and myself were very much about, hey, we need innovation, we need technology to advance our larger strategy from reporting to our goals, to our commitments. I'm curious from your perspective. Give us a little more flavor on that. Tell us about what does the role of technology play in reporting on your ESG goals and how you see that formulating?
Yeah. So it's been such an evolution. First and foremost, I believe that trust starts with transparency. And I recall early in the days of sustainability, I think the only person who read any of my reports was like my mom, because and like a handful of us, the stalwarts who have been working in this field forever. But the maturity and the evolution and the sophistication here with really trying to understand what's material, what's relevant to a company, how do I feel really confident about the numbers, how am I speaking about our reporting in a way that is not just transparent but really has some credibility is so key. And so I'll highlight just a few things that we have done. We've partnered with, for example, Datamaran on a materiality review, which of course we marry with a lot of our boots on the ground work and the formal stakeholder processes that we have as a utility to really make sure we're focused on the right issues. When we set our scope 3 goal, when we expanded our scope 1 goal to include scope 2 and 3, we did a lot of work partnering very closely internally with a wide variety of people. As you can imagine, Scope 3 covers basically every tentacle of an enterprise. But we also brought in Accenture to help us make sure that we were using the best possible methodology and to get our arms around what Scope 3 would look like, and that we felt like we had a third party validate our approach, our assumptions, and then the numbers that we were putting out into the public discourse. And then, of course, just this past year, we partnered with Workiva as we've been really thinking about maturing our overall reporting. So how are we telling that story? How are we aligning our reporting internally with the tools and the mechanisms that our business partners over in finance are using and IR are using, but also in a way that really enhances the credibility and the robustness of what we're putting out into the public square.
It really is, and we've talked about it on the show before, that three-legged stool, right? As practitioners head into 2024 and beyond, it's that idea of teachers, the consultants, like you mentioned, with Accenture, the technology, and it may be different tools of technology to get you to your final stage of goals and goal setting, as well as then the talent, great talent that you have on your team. And it's a combination of those three, because you have to have the tick and the talk to build what I love what you just said, that the trust and transparency coming together. Katherine, as we enter a new year and many companies inch closer and closer to the timing of their net zero pledges, We would love to know, what is your advice for sustainability leaders as they look ahead to the year and deliver on their energy or sustainability goals?
That's a great question. At the top, my advice is to really be to take this time to do the important goal setting, to really make sure that you're focused on what truly matters to the business and to the communities that you serve. I think it's so hard as ESG or sustainability practitioners to make choices and say this is more important than that. But I think the focus enables us to drive the forward progress. So coupled with trying to decide where to stay focused on the goals, what are the issues that really are relevant, identifying what you're not going to do, what maybe was useful 3 years ago and is no longer adding value, is it's important to also do a little bit of an elimination so that you can stay focused. And then this work is hard. We've been working on it for, some of us are new to it, some of us have been in the field for a long time. It's hard. The issues are getting more complex. Our ambition is sometimes a little over our skis in some cases. There's a sense of urgency, and then there's some real headwinds to what we're trying to do. And so I also really encourage my team and anyone I work with, or anyone I bump into on the metro, really to make sure to take some time to rest and rejuvenate and to refresh, because this work does really need all of us our at the top of our game.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your journey at the top of your game, and allowing all of us to have some practical takeaways for how we approach the energy transition, how we think about our variety of stakeholders, maybe within our customer base, to those that we engage with, to the technology that builds transparency and trust. So, Katherine, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It was a real joy. Thank you.
To our audience, thank you all for joining us for another episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk. Stay tuned for more episodes looking at how organizations and teams are coming together in the name of ESG to address risk and seize opportunity for both business and society. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We'll talk again real soon.